after action report for the RAF mock raid on the 1st of February, or it would have been the 31st of January for the NA and EU guys. So, basic summary of this after action report: how the op preparation went, how the comms were broken up, the two raids that occurred, and the cap operation that my detachment flew. So, operation was led and organized by Eskimo from RAF. My air detachment flew in 4 fighters from our own stockpiles from across the map. We managed to get deployed very, very quickly. So we were on standby once RAF had gotten about like I think it was like 24 guys. Got into the Discord, got onto the airfield on Deadlands, and then prepped their aircraft. Eskimo planned 2 raids. I'll be showing his slides. They're not mine. I'll point it out in a second here. His main overall plan was to hit 2 targets in 2 different hexes, one for each raid, deploy fighters and bombers simultaneously, and try to conduct a strike raid with 2 different aircraft types. So, okay, these are the slides from Eskimo. So this was the original plan for the deployment, how we were going to deploy the fighters and the bombers on the airfield and where we were going to deploy them. This was the slides for the escort formation, information regarding cruise speeds on the slide there. This is how he wanted us to deploy for when we were making our attack run, the bombing run. This is the first raid into King's Cage. The red line is the initial attack route, and the green line is the return route. The second target was in Lin of Mercy. So for my detachment, prior to even deploying, we got one TeamSpeak channel online, all 4 guys on the channel. We didn't have a plan initially to do any of this, so we did all of this on the fly from the moment that we logged on about half an hour before the op started. So I broke up my flight into 2 different sections. Dan, he's an experienced pilot. He plays a lot of sim in War Thunder. He's played a lot with me. So I designated him section lead. Red was his wingman, and Gorg flew on my wing. So for the first raid, we got bombed on the airfield. I'll try to put up footage in the background here to show like what was going on. But basically, the prep here, right? It was very inefficient, and no fault to anybody because it's the first time that everyone's trying it out. But what I can say is that Core at least has figured out if you're running just pure fighter operations, because that's what most of the stuff that we've done so far in my detachment at least is just purely fighter operations. The way you want to deploy the fighters up the airfield is not lengthwise of the runway. You wanna deploy them horizontally across, because the takeoff distance on the fighter is like extremely short. You can actually probably take off with like only 3/4 of the horizontal length here of the runway. And what's very good about taking off on the runway this way is that you can stack all of your aircraft. If you have like a very large formation, you can stack them all up in one line and they can all take off simultaneously. Whereas if you try to take off lengthwise like this, if it's a very large formation, some of the aircraft are going to be off the runway, so they'll need time to taxi on the runway and then take off. So there's going to be like a staggered formation behind there. It's not that big of a deal anymore because of how the fuel consumption rates have been modified. You can take your time forming up the whole flight once you're going on target. The standard cruise speed for my detachment is 112 knots for the fighters. That's more than enough room and speed for the wingman to maneuver themselves onto the leader, and then they can form up on the way to wherever it is they're flying. So yeah, I think this would be much better. And as for the bombers, I've only flown bombers twice. The bombers really only need like a quarter of the runway to take off from. It's a lot longer than the fighter, but it's also in terms of relative distance of the length of the runway, it is still quite short. So I think it might be if you're doing like a bigger raid, you just split up the bombers into pairs, just like how, at least in my detachment, we do with the fighters. Just have the section or the element as like the base unit, and then just have them take off from like opposite ends of the runway because there's like plenty of space in between. Then have them turn away from each other to avoid any collisions. There would be more than enough space to do that, and then the fighters can just take off from the middle of the runway across sideways. There's plenty of room, and you can get a lot of aircraft airborne that way, like very, very quickly. But yeah, that's just my recommendation. So we got bombed on the airfield. We didn't have a cap on. It was being discussed on the TeamSpeak channel as we were waiting on standby for the rest of the formation to get ready to deploy, that this was taking too long. And well, it's the first time everybody else was doing it, so we just sat there, and I didn't want to say anything because having 28 guys on the single Discord, it was very, very hectic. There was like a lot of times where there were like at least 10 different people all talking at the same time. Trying to disseminate tactical information was like it didn't happen. All of my tactical information regarding all of the fights that occurred during both raids, it all was on TeamSpeak. With having TeamSpeak, it just came in clutch. I was able to designate, command, and control my section and Dan's section, and we managed to actually get a shoot down during the second raid. I'll get to that later. But I didn't want to say anything because one, Eskimo already had everything a lot on his hands trying to get everybody deployed onto the runway in the first place, and it wasn't our op, so I didn't want to interfere in anything that he may have had planned in his mind. So we just let that happen. We did get bombed. We lost a couple of planes on the airfield. I got hit. My wingman got hit. But yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, as I mentioned, the takeoff formation. Okay, yeah. Once we did eventually get off on the first raid, it took a very long time to get everybody like in formation, and we lost a decent amount of fuel, just like flying around in circles, trying to find where everybody was once they had taken off. The only thing I can add to this is that my flight didn't have much problems trying to find each other and form up. Um, Purely because RAF at the beginning, somebody did ask, "Is like, are we going to split up into like different elements or sections or sub command?" They didn't want to do that, and I don't blame them because it would have taken, that should have been prepped beforehand, and it should have been assigned to everybody. But there was no time to do that. It took as long enough as it was. So, but all I can say is that for this after action, I can say that that is practical. Is that you split the guys up into sub units, and then you have like 2-man sections. And so long as the wingmen who are flying in these sections understand that it's their job to stick with their leader and not say much over the channel because everyone's using just a single channel. They need to be able to anticipate and look at the leader when the leader is turning or making maneuvers and whatnot. It's going to come down to practice in that regard. Because my flight managed to take off in the middle of everything, and we did manage to form up all four of us and fly escort for the first raid at least. All well tight formation, slightly behind, bringing up the rear. So the first raid was like pretty successful despite all of the things that went wrong. We got like, I think at least almost 20 aircraft in the air, close to 20. That's include the fighters and the bombers. And the bombers lit up the enemy runway on the first raid. We didn't encounter stiff resistance. I think there was a couple of fighters. We had a couple of shoot downs. I wasn't a part of these fights because of how large the operation was. The fights occurred on like other side of the formation, which I didn't even have visual range to see what was going on. So that was that. Um, we landed back at Ditland's airfield, and it was at this point here that we're trying to get everyone reformed again and try to get it done as quick and efficiently as possible. That I then just made the decision over TeamSpeak that we were going to fly the cap over the airfield because I didn't want us to get bombed again. And what we did was I deployed my flight to the west side of Ditlands. I'll show here. Yeah, I'll show this slide here. I deployed my flight, split them into two sections. I decided to make an orbit around this. Let me use a different color. Give me a second. So I had my section orbit around here, north of the river, and I had Dan circle around the south side. So that way we had, good coverage, good visual range coverage of the west side of the airfield, which was located here. And what actually did happen was that a bomber actually did make an incursion from the Lin of Mercy. Actually, I'm not entirely sure from which hex, but it did come in from a vector from the west side. So it either came in from like this angle or this angle, and it went right into Dan's section. So Dan was able to detect this bomber very early as it was crossing the border, called it out. He called it out on TeamSpeak. So I then vectored my section to intercept, which came in at around like this angle here. Once Dan relayed the information to me, I then relayed it on Discord to Eskimo to inform him that, we got a bomber coming in to hit the airfield. And Dan got his section in on the bomber. He didn't have an escort. He started lighting it up. I got in about like 20 seconds afterwards, after he first engaged. My section went in, engaged, and we just ripped the bomber apart. There was another random friendly fighter in the area. It wasn't part of our operation or our squadron. And he joined in too, and yeah, we deleted the guy. All 5 fighters just went in on him, and the bomber never got his payload off. And I'm pretty sure the bomber never actually got close to the airfield. The very early detection was very important because Eskimo actually managed to get himself and a couple of the fighters off the airfield, and by the time he got there, the bomber was just about going down. So yeah, this was great, and like I said earlier, it was all done over TeamSpeak because it could not have been done over Discord. There was still too much stuff going on regarding trying to get everyone organized. But hopefully here it can demonstrate that you can maintain and control like multiple units within a larger operation here, and enact tactical control that was helpful and practical. So for the second raid, what occurred here was that I told Eskimo that I was just going to keep the cap on station. The problem here was that we deployed all simultaneously. So once we ran out of fuel, we all had to return to the airfield. Then there was no more cap. And if there was a warden attack, there was nothing that was going to happen there. They were going to get in and hit the airfield again. But the wardens didn't make any attempt during this time. I think we just like got lucky. I suppose they just gave up after that. What we found out earlier, well, no, what we found out later towards the end of the whole operation was that the enemy was already massing for their own op in Little Mercy, and we had basically disrupted that operation with the second raid. So I think that was what was going on there. They didn't attack us because they were getting ready for a bigger operation. But yeah, we conducted the cap for like another 2 more sorties around the airfield whilst the second raid was getting ready. And what I told Eskimo was that once they had taken off, what we would do, we would go back to the airfield, land the cap, rearm, refuel, and then what we were going to do is going to link up with them on the return journey so that we could theoretically try the fighter relay system. Core wanted to try this out, but I don't know if anybody else has already tried it out in my regiment. But we didn't quite get it off because the bombers went down over the target zone. So we never linked up with the bombers, but we were in the air in on time to have, if they were on the inbound leg, to have been on station right on top of them with quite a decent amount of fuel. So theoretically, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't have worked practically to have a fighter relay system like that. So yeah, that's the main points that occurred for this here operation. Our cruise speed for the fighters is 112 knots. That's what we found to be like pretty efficient. Um, we did end up had slowed down the 112 because the bombers they too cut their throttles off, at least for the first raid. At least I didn't look like they were going at 117 from my point of view. So there was that. Having the formation like this tight, I didn't think it was like very practical. I didn't quite see it occur. It's better to just have everyone split up into different sections and just have the pairs somewhere nearby the bombers. Have the fighters further out forward in front of the bombers, and have the other fighters like further to the sides or the rear. It doesn't. You don't really need to have them like this close with the bombers themselves. Because ideally, you want to engage the fighters long before they get visual contact with the bombers. You want to engage the enemy fighters before they get visual on our friendly bombers. That's gonna take like a lot of work. Yeah, that would take a lot of work. It comes down to comms, command and control for that one. Um, but because of how much HP the bombers have, there isn't really any detriment if you really want to just keep it like this close, because if you keep formations this close, you solve a lot of your command and control problems. All you need to do is just get everybody in the big one big group and send them all together, and then everyone's all force concentrated. It solves a lot of problems there. And even if the enemy, you only detect the enemy as they are about to get into range and begin to attack, the bombers can take quite a lot of damage before they start going down, and it's more than enough time for the fighters to maneuver in to get in around and shake them off. So pros cons here there. That one still needs to be tested, I suppose. This raid was pretty short, and like I said before, the assembly times of trying to get all the planes into formation, that burned quite a lot of fuel. So if it was a live war, right, trying to conduct a longer range raid, it would require a lot of discipline and practice. I don't see why it can't be done. I'm pretty sure we could very easily strike a target like 2 hexes out, 3 hexes, sorry, in this case, and then come back. And if we use the fighter relay system, we should be able to have fighters on station over the bombers throughout the entire journey with enough fuel to do any dogfighting. So yeah, that's the end of my after action report. Those are the main points that I wanted to raise. Yeah, thanks for listening.